In Egypt, in 1334 BCE, a 9-year-old child becomes king. He is the Pharaoh Tutankhamun. In November 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter was preparing to discover the tomb of the boy king, Tutankhamun. When Lord Carnarvon, his patron and supporter, nervously asked if he had seen anything, Carter's only response was, "Yes, wonderful things." Howard Carter once received an invitation from the Duke of Alba to stay at the Lyria Palace. There, Carter came across a document he really appreciated, a telegram from the Duke informing him that he could not travel to Egypt that year because his wife was pregnant. She was expecting the Duchess of Alba. Some people know that King Alfonso XIII of Spain had spoken to the King of Egypt and obtained permission for Carter to begin excavating. Carter wrote in his notes that he was on his way to Madrid and that he held a conference at the student residence on November 24th. Mohammed Abd el-Rasul, the grandson of the famous child Carter mentioned in some of his lectures, was the one who discovered the first step leading to the tomb in 1922. Every nobleman had his castle, and Lord Carnarvon's castle was called Highclere Castle. Today, everyone recognizes it as the location where the stunning scenes of the famous TV series Downton Abbey were filmed. Don't forget to support us, my friend. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Abu Simbel Temple is considered today one of the most famous artistic landmarks in Egypt, but it did not exist during the era of Tutankhamun. Here, we met the archaeologist and Egyptologist Tito Vivas, who spent years studying the history of this country. Perhaps nothing we see today existed in this area during Tutankhamun's time. What we see in Abu Simbel are temples built by King Ramses II during the 19th dynasty. Ramses II was compelled to reorganize the political and religious chaos left behind by the end of the 18th dynasty, beginning with Amenhotep IV, Akhenaten, and continuing through the reign of Tutankhamun. What is the secret of the sun phenomenon at Abu Simbel? This phenomenon occurs only twice a year when sunlight penetrates to a depth of more than 60 meters inside the temple, illuminating 3 of the 4 religious symbols for a few minutes. This mystery was known only to the priests of Abu Simbel. There is no doubt that ancient Egyptians had astronomical priests capable of predicting celestial movements with millimeter precision. Across the horizon, the brilliant sunrise illuminates the religious statues inside the temple twice a year, including the statue of Ramses II. This phenomenon takes place on February 21st and October 21st, 60 days before and after the winter solstice. When the Aswan High Dam was built and the temple was relocated to save it from flooding, the dates of this phenomenon shifted by 1 day, and it is now celebrated on February 22nd and October 22nd. Strangely, the number 22 appears again. Regardless of whether there were errors in aligning the temple, the phenomenon remains linked to the second month of both February and October. I think the answer to this question is very simple. There were no electronic platforms like Netflix or the internet at the time. People had enough time to dedicate their entire lives to observing the sky day and night, documenting the movements of the planets, and engraving them directly onto stone. Howard Carter worked as an inspector for the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt for a period of time. He didn't hold this position as an archaeologist, as he had no formal academic studies or university degree. Carter was an exceptional painter, particularly skilled in watercolor, a talent he inherited from his father and family. His father, Samuel Carter, was a brilliant watercolor artist who worked for prominent patrons during his life. Howard Carter was born on the outskirts of London in 1874, into a family deeply connected to the art world. From a young age, Carter inherited the ability to paint and create watercolors, which later drove him to seek out other discoveries. But how was his character shaped, pushing him to insist on finding Tutankhamun in the end. We are in England, traveling to Swaffham in northern Norfolk. Although Carter was born in London, this was the hometown of his parents, Samuel Carter and Martha Joyce. Almost everything here is dedicated to Carter, from the museum to the restaurant run by a family member. Many of his relatives were buried in Swaffham. In fact, although he was a smart child, he attended school only briefly due to health reasons. Soon, his life began to change dramatically, and he spent some time living in his family home. The Amherst family, who lived nearby, owned an Egyptian collection. Through his father, Carter became familiar with the drawings, coffins, vases, and artifacts that recreated the ancient world of Egypt. This fascination, which he began to feel for the era of the pharaohs, may have reached its peak in 1891, when he was about 17 years old. At that time, he was invited to join an archaeological expedition in Beni Hassan. As a watercolor artist, Carter came there with a grant from the Egypt Exploration Fund, thanks to the wealthy Amherst family. He began working on the tombs of Beni Hassan and later moved on to excavations in Amarna under the supervision of William Flinders Petrie. He transitioned from being a simple watercolor artist to learning the science of archaeology, which he later applied while working with Edouard Navi in Deir el-Bahari. There, he initially arrived as an artist, but began to develop many other excavation-related skills. His job was simple. He had to copy the bas-relief inscriptions. But Carter was skilled. Now we are at the Griffith Institute at the University of Oxford, where the Spanish restoration expert Francisco Bosch Puche shows us Carter's original drawings. These are preserved under strict security measures and at a constant temperature to prevent damage. The Griffith Institute holds lesser-known documents related to Howard Carter, including various records of the excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb. Here, there are catalogue cards for more than 5,000 artifacts that were found in the tomb. This document, for example, corresponds to one specific artifact, a golden altar numbered 108. Carter assigned a number to each artifact, which followed the item from the tomb to the Cairo Museum. The first plates, written in Carter's own handwriting, provide information about the location, dimensions, and description of the artifact. Interestingly, the names of Tutankhamun appear on these documents. We say names because Egyptian pharaohs often had multiple names. Here, we see the name Tutankhamun followed by a title. This was the name given to him at birth. We also have the name Tutankhamun received at his coronation, Nebkheperur. These names are reflected throughout his tomb. The ancient Egyptian pharaohs had 5 names, one of which was their birth name. Upon ascending to the throne, they were granted 4 additional names. Here, we have a diagram drawn by Carter himself of the burial chamber, which indicates the location of the pharaoh's mummy. Carter cleverly provides us with all this information in his diagram, highlighting the small size of everything. Inside the chamber, we find what resembles a set of Russian nesting dolls, consisting of 4 gilded wooden shrines. This rectangle represents a quartzite sarcophagus. Inside the stone sarcophagus lies the first golden coffin, and there are even more Russian dolls, represented by the second gilded wooden coffin. Additionally, there is a third coffin made of gold, weighing 110 kilograms. Finally, we find the king's mummy adorned with the famous funerary mask on his head. This is one of the most iconic images of the tomb. The first thing they saw when they dug toward the antechamber was these marvelous famous objects. This is the original glass plate photograph. Here we also have another draft of an image taken by Harry Burton, showing the funerary mask after it had been slightly cleaned while still inside the coffin. As you can see, the beard was missing. It had detached, and traces of the ointments that covered it were still visible. The exhibitions were long, and attention to every detail was required. We were in a dusty place. It was truly complicated. But we are talking about an exceptional photographer who used one of the tombs as a photography studio and a darkroom where they stored drafts of the photos. I would have checked them to ensure that everything was in its place, but they were kept in metal boxes and transported here by ship. In other words, if all these photo drafts survived, it must sometimes make one feel incredibly fortunate. Here are 2 watercolor paintings depicting tombs from Middle Egypt. One painting shows a fishing scene. Here is the net with fish inside it, and there seems to be a crack in the wall. Any artist might have wanted to restore the missing part, but Carter didn't. Instead, he simply marked the opening and documented things as they were. Anyone aspiring to become an archaeologist usually joined Petrie's team. Here we have Petrie's diaries, which recount his first impressions of meeting Carter at the age of 17 and describe what happened in the days that followed. Petrie wrote that Carter was a good boy, but mostly interested in drawings and natural history. He didn't consider him worth the effort to train as an archaeologist. Years later, Petrie would realize that he had been wrong. Over time, Carter slowly transformed from being more of an artist into a dedicated archaeologist. Perhaps the defining trait of Howard Carter's success was his personality, temperament, and refusal to give up even in the worst moments or toughest adversities. This earned him the trust of Maspero, who granted him the title or position of inspector in the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt. After that, Carter didn't just live in Egypt, he rarely returned to England. He learned excavation techniques and eventually became one of the most methodical archaeologists and one of the greatest experts in the history of Egyptology. But the worst was yet to come. A major incident occurred following a violent confrontation between Egyptian site guards and French tourists at Saqqara, the famous necropolis near Cairo. Carter defended the Egyptian workers and refused to apologize when French authorities filed an official complaint. He had a strong personality, so to speak, and this caused him trouble. Beatrice Cagnes, deputy director of the Egyptian Lyceum Museum in Lyon, informed those in charge that Howard Carter could resolve the chaos. However, instead of siding with the French, Carter defended the workers, which landed him in significant trouble. His refusal to offer assistance led to his dismissal from the Antiquities Authority. This made life difficult for Carter, as he had to dedicate himself to painting and use his artistic talent to make a living by selling his artwork to tourists. Although Howard Carter became unemployed and suffered disdain from most Egyptologists or academics, he insisted and affirmed an idea that was clear to him. The tomb of the king, which had not yet been found, must appear at some stage. He would not have succeeded without his persistence. Everything in his life changed in 1907. What caused his luck to improve? Carter began working for Lord Carnarvon, one of the British nobles interested in archaeology. In England, every nobleman had his own castle, and Lord Carnarvon's castle was called Highclere Castle. It is now well known as the location where the stunning scenes of the famous TV series Downton Abbey were filmed. Lord Carnarvon had a very progressive personality for the early 20th century. He learned to fly planes and drive cars. The reason he traveled to Egypt was that he had suffered a serious accident in Germany, which caused significant damage to his lungs. As a result, doctors advised him to spend his winters in a warm place, so he went to Egypt. He spent his first year enjoying the comfort of luxurious hotels, but he eventually grew bored and decided to engage in excavation work. He requested permission to start and was granted it, but he was told that he needed someone to guide him in excavation activities. In the end, he turned to Howard Carter. We are in Luxor, in front of the Winter Palace Hotel, the former palace of King Farouk, which later became one of the most luxurious hotels. This was the place where all the aristocrats, archaeologists and tourists stayed in the 1920s when they came to work in the holy city of archaeology, Luxor. For instance, this is where Lord Carnarvon stayed upon his arrival in Egypt. Carter knew that this place was a gathering point for all the aristocrats and archaeologists he worked for or collaborated with. During his time as an inspector at the Antiquities Authority, he understood that this place served as a meeting hub. For example, when the tomb was discovered, Howard Carter came to this location and left notices with the reception staff announcing that an intact royal tomb had been discovered in the Valley of the Kings. This place served as a connection point with the world. Carter did not stay at the hotel in any case, as he belonged to a modest social class and faced some complications and difficulties in social interactions. He always preferred to live on the other side of the river, where he completed the construction of his own house. He used it to manage and coordinate work with the laborers who lived on the western bank of the river. This house was built when Howard Carter began working in the Valley of the Kings in the service of Lord Carnarvon. The house was constructed using bricks provided as a gift by Carnarvon, who had requested they be brought from England. It is believed that work meetings were held here, in this very office, to discuss the methodologies and approaches to be used in the excavation. However, this makes one wonder what happened in this house on the days when there were no meetings. Carter was certainly a lonely man, and the nights in this house must have been very long when no one accompanied him except for the sounds of the desert at night. This house evokes the greatest discovery in human history and tells us about the hard work that had to be done for over 10 years. Despite Carter's solitude, he must have received some visitors, including Lord Carnarvon, who occasionally came to visit him in this house. Regardless of the fact that Carnarvon was staying at the Winter Palace Hotel, photographic evidence shows that this was the guest room. The hammock in which the famous photograph of Lord Carnarvon was taken is still preserved in that corner. On one of his visits to his colleague and partner Carter, Carnarvon was sitting there reading. Carter preferred to live on the west bank of the Nile, close to his workers and near the Valley of the Kings, far from all the aristocrats and tourists who usually stayed on the opposite bank. The partnership between Carter and Carnarvon was based on the former contributing his scientific expertise and the latter providing financial support. When Carter was dismissed for 2 years, he had to flee after being expelled from the Serapeum and had to work as an artist to earn his living. This was a form of punishment, but he realized that had he not been dismissed, he would never have met Carnarvon. This dismissal turned out to be an opportunity, and a strong friendship developed between the two. Over time, they reached a point where mutual respect was established and remained intact until something unexpected occurred. Carter was overjoyed with what he had found, but seemed to forget that Lord Carnarvon also wanted to achieve that great discovery. What Carnarvon desired was to keep half of the treasure, which was both legal and common practice at the time. Years passed, and Carnarvon reminded Carter that the privileges were granted to the person funding the work, not the excavation manager. Had Carnarvon given up on excavations in the Valley of the Kings, Carter would have had nothing left to do. After years of excavation, they reached a point where Carnarvon declared, "That's enough, we haven't found anything." When he said this at Highclere Castle, Carter replied, "Come on, this is the final campaign. If you don't want to join us, don't. But I will be there and I'll pay for it myself." Carter was determined to continue, saying he would cover the expenses himself and wouldn't give up on the excavation. Carnarvon, being very clever, replied that things wouldn't be as simple as Carter thought in this last attempt. In the end, Carnarvon was proven right. On November 4, 1922, a boy from the team stumbled upon a stone that turned out to be the beginning of stairs leading to the tomb of Tutankhamun. But was that really the case? Mohammed Abdel Rasool is the descendant of the famous boy mentioned in Carter's lectures on several occasions, who discovered the first step of the tomb staircase in 1922. He was the boy who brought water to the excavation team. According to accounts, he found the first step of the entrance stairs when he was placing a water jar. Mohammed Abdel Rasool, the grandson of that boy, is proud of this story, which emerged during interviews and conferences conducted by Howard Carter in the United States. Carter spoke of a water boy discovering the tomb's first step, creating a myth that added mystery and emotion to the discovery. There is no documented evidence of this claim, not in newspapers, references, or photographs. Most importantly, none of the Egyptians who were part of the excavation spoke about a water boy or associated him with the individual now claimed to be the hero of the story until about 15 years ago. However, a famous photograph was taken of a boy standing next to Tutankhamun's tomb when he was about 10 years old. There are countless interviews where Abdel Rasool narrates the story of the tomb's discovery, but in none of them does he speak accurately about the condition of Tutankhamun's sarcophagus. This story is a modern myth, attributed to the boy and added to the narrative later on. The children were just ordinary kids at the time, and when they passed away, their descendants adopted this mythical tale alongside the actual stories of their parents. It is a strange story, but it still resonates despite lacking any historical or factual foundation. In any case, it was Howard Carter who discovered Tutankhamun's tomb. Carter managed to take a quick look inside the tomb by candlelight and saw golden treasures. Lord Carnarvon asked him if he could see anything, and Carter responded with his famous line, "Yes, I can see wonderful things." But was this really the case, or are we dealing with another marketing narrative? Among Carter's notebooks, where he documented his diaries, there is mention of this moment. It even includes references to his correspondence with Carnarvon. In one of the pages, written in italics, it becomes evident that Carter, known for his meticulousness, seemed nervous and excited at that moment. He wrote only 5 words: "Found the first steps to tomb." Carter's diaries also mention November 26th, the day they looked inside the tomb from the antechamber. Carter explained that tension was palpable among everyone, as not all of them could see what was inside. At one specific point, Carnarvon asked Carter, "But can you see anything?" Carter's response was yes, which was later altered to the famous line, "Wonderful things," in the widely circulated story. However, the original phrase is preserved in Carter's diaries, and it was not recorded by the Griffith Institute as wonderful things. Nevertheless, what they saw was undoubtedly remarkable. Although the photos appear to have been taken in a studio, they were actually captured in the Valley of the Kings, with a white cloth used as a backdrop. The room had been entirely emptied, but the statues were deliberately left in place. During the excavation, they carefully considered how to present the narrative in a promotional way, which is why we see a collection of meticulously planned photographs. This particular photo was carefully staged. Everyone had to hold their breath and remain still while Burton took the picture. They also studied the lighting positions and the angles of the doors, which were not fully opened, focusing on capturing the different faces. These are the journals kept by Minnie, the photographer's wife, for many years while she lived with him in Egypt. She is the one wearing the white hat. Minnie wrote extensively about the visitors who came to the site and kept a diary, where she documented her experiences, wrote letters, and tended to the garden. From an Egyptology perspective, it is clear that many women participated in archaeological expeditions, particularly in the early 20th century. However, their contributions often went unacknowledged. Female Egyptologists were rarely credited on publications or articles, but they played an essential role. Perhaps the most famous of these women was Nina Davies, who worked actively alongside her husband in documenting tombs. Despite the male-dominated nature of the field, women were involved in the work, although often behind the scenes. All of that has changed now. Today, we live in a world where many archaeological missions are led by women. Egyptians, too, have embraced the presence of women as leaders of archaeological teams. The world has changed immensely from that time to the present. When we talk about the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, we always mention Carter and Lord Carnarvon. However, an interesting figure is Lady Evelyn, the daughter of Lord Carnarvon and the apple of his eye. She was a beautiful young woman who actively participated in archaeological campaigns alongside her father. It is also possible that she advised him and offered her opinions on how the excavations were carried out. More than anything else, beyond the stories, she represented many women of her time who accompanied their husbands or fathers and actively participated in excavation work. Howard Carter had to travel to England personally to Lord Carnarvon's castle in order to persuade him not to end the archaeological expedition. Carter's perseverance and determination never failed to amaze me, in addition to his excavation methods, which remained unchanged. Today, modern techniques are, of course, applied in archaeology, allowing us to gain more precise information. There is a long-standing tradition among workers in Luxor, where sons inherit the profession from their fathers, generation after generation. Sometimes I wonder if the workers accompanying me today might be the descendants of those who once worked with Howard Carter. And today, in particular, they discovered something surprising in one of their latest excavations. What was the discovery related to Tutankhamun? We found the temple's trash heap. The temple's waste disposal site contained a large number of vessels, as it was the place where offerings were brought. A person would come with a container, offer the sacrifice, and then dispose of the ceramic vessel. We discovered thousands upon thousands of pottery fragments. However, some of these vessels had lids to seal them, usually made of clay, and these lids often bore a seal indicating their contents. The inscriptions would specify whether they contained honey or a beverage, and they would also bear the name of the person presenting the offering to the temple. Among these seals, we found one bearing the name of Tutankhamun, confirming that he had made an offering of a drink at the temple of Thutmose III. This means that the temple was still active during the reign of Tutankhamun. Even after more than 100 years, we are still fascinated by his mysteries. What is the connection between Tutankhamun, Madrid, and Howard Carter? What was the relationship between Carter and the Duchess of Alba? The Duke of Alba, the father of the Duchess of Alba, was a close friend of Howard Carter. He met Carter and traveled with him to Egypt on multiple occasions. Carter wanted to share with him the excitement of discovery, and they exchanged letters in which Carter would report, step by step, on his daily excavation activities. Carter became a star, and wealthy tourists began arriving at the tomb, eager to see him on site. Carter objected to this because he was focused on cataloguing the artifacts, but the Egyptian government was interested in the publicity. Eventually, after another dispute with the Egyptian authorities, the famous archaeologist left Tutankhamun's tomb, literally walking away from it. Carter returned to England and began giving lectures around the world. He met the Duke of Alba in Cairo and invited him to participate in a series of conferences in 1924. This also happened again in 1928. But in my opinion, the most significant visit was in 1924, as Carter had left Egypt due to government interference in his work. Although he had made some mistakes, he lacked strong social skills when dealing with people. Despite this, we can say he was partially justified. After all, he was the excavation director, and it was not within his power to allow or prevent anyone from staying. This misunderstanding led to tensions with the Egyptian authorities, ultimately resulting in his resignation. Along with other archaeologists, he resigned and dedicated himself to traveling across Europe and the United States to participate in conferences. The Duke of Alba invited Carter to Madrid twice to deliver lectures at the invitation of the Spanish-English Committee. 2 conferences were held in 1924 and 1928. This is the Liria Palace in Madrid. Thanks to a special permit from the Casa de Alba Foundation, we will gain insight into the place where Howard Carter stayed in Spain, invited by Duke Jacobo. The Duke's journey continued until he reached Aswan. Here is a photo of them on the Nile and in front of the pyramids. This is fascinating. And here is another picture of the Duke and the Duchess riding camels. This is the Karnak Temple. Look how magnificent it is. There is also an important document, a telegram in which the Duke informed Carter that he could not travel to Egypt that year because his wife was expecting a child, the future Duchess of Alba. Carter responded with a congratulatory telegram, expressing his regret that the Duke could not come but offering his best wishes for the upcoming birth. The Duchess of Alba was deeply passionate about Egypt. In 2008, I organized a conference in Seville and invited Dr. Zahi Hawass to give a lecture at the Academy of Fine Arts. The Duchess of Alba attended the event, and when we introduced her to Dr. Hawass, she mentioned that she had been in Cairo with her father during the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. This, of course, caught my attention. Additionally, we found a collection of letters written by Howard Carter to the Duke of Alba. Carter stayed at Liria Palace on both occasions and described it as an exceptional place. He was deeply grateful for the warm reception he received from the Spanish public. We visited the student residence for scientific research in Spain, the legendary residence where many figures of the generation of 1927 lived. Lorca, Dali, and Buñuel were here during those years, and Howard Carter came to hold a conference in the style of a top-tier movie star. Virtuoso Valverde, a documentary writer at the student residence, revealed unique and highly unknown details. The materials he left behind disappeared after the war, but they included complete frames loaned for display. This booklet from 1924 documents that the first conference at the student residence took place then. For the second one, they had to find a theatre, and the sought-after venue was the Font Alba Theatre, as the audience was overwhelmingly large, necessitating another location. Carter's words received extensive media coverage at the time because he was an excellent speaker. Few people know that King Alfonso XIII spoke to the King of Egypt and obtained his approval for Carter to resume excavations. A telegram from the Spanish embassy in Cairo, preserved in the Liria Palace, was sent to the Duke of Alba, requesting him to contact Carter in London and inform him that he had obtained permission again. There are also photos of King Alfonso XIII, for example, making a private visit to the Valley of the Kings, accompanied by Howard Carter as a guide, perhaps to thank him for this kind gesture. They also visited Egypt and the Sphinx. Years ago, I had the opportunity to meet Duchess Cayetana in Giza. We can say that the Dukes of Alba were always closely linked to the world of art, primarily due to this unknown history of the tomb's discovery. In 1925, Carter was finally able to examine the mummy of Tutankhamun. Transporting the tomb's contents took 8 years, with the last piece being moved on November 10, 1930. Despite an unpublished letter from 2022 revealing that Carter may have taken artifacts from Tutankhamun's treasure without authorization, the archaeologist always denied any theft, and the Egyptians could never prove their suspicions. However, what seems certain is that Carter, Carnarvon, and Lady Evelyn secretly entered the tomb of Tutankhamun on the night of November 6th, just days before the official opening, and did so in the presence of Egyptian authorities. In any case, not everything was illegal at that time, as Egypt permitted the removal of various artifacts with proper authorization. The tomb was not intact, as it had been looted previously. According to the contract, at least half of the findings could be taken, so, when considered from this perspective, it was within their rights. After cataloguing all the artifacts in the tomb, Carter retired from archaeology and worked part-time as an agent for collectors and museums. However, he lived in seclusion, as interest in Tutankhamun faded and he had only a few close friends. Howard Carter died on March 2, 1939, at the age of 64. He was alone, without personal relationships or children, and was buried in Putney Vale, West London. His grave remains well maintained to this day, and only a few Egypt enthusiasts visit to pay their respects. Carter never received any honors from the British government, perhaps due to his lack of political diplomacy. Howard Carter and Tutankhamun, these two names will forever be linked. Carter never gave up because he was convinced the tomb was there. It was a significant discovery in Egyptology. If the fascination with Egypt's history has always existed, we are still amazed by the great discoveries we see, ones that remain imprinted in our minds. Perhaps Tutankhamun was one of the most important kings in Egypt's history, but he is undoubtedly the most famous pharaoh in human history. Carter knew the tomb existed and never stopped until he found it. Do you see anything? Yes, wonderful things. These are the records of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Don't forget to support us, my friend. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video.